Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Goldstein, CEO of MyExpatTaxes and an IRS enrolled agent. And we just conducted the US 2024 election survey, which was the largest US expat survey of this year with around 15,000 participants. And the results, they were interesting to say the least, just because what does it mean to be an American abroad with the topic of having to vote in this election? So let's dive into the results and see how do our fellow Americans feel about their right to vote in conjunction with their requirement to file taxes. So who did we survey? We had participants coming in from 89 different countries from around the world. They all weigh in on what they felt was important in terms of life quality abroad, paying taxes, and of course, voting, right? Because voting is the big topic of this time with the upcoming election. So, first off, the most important question is, would you give up the right to vote if it meant not having to file US taxes? 59% said yes, that they would give up their right to vote in the US election from abroad if that meant they did not have to file their US taxes from abroad. Now, of course, we know that every American abroad has to file taxes if they're earning, a certain amount of income. So obviously, that means that you are being taxed no matter where you live. Make sure you vote. Now, the next question is, would you be happy paying higher taxes abroad if it meant better access to healthcare, social security nets, and better pension schemes? 88% said, yeah, I'm okay to pay higher taxes if that generally means, do we say better life quality, or do we say really just a sense of safety, of financial security being abroad? And I think that that question, it is a really important one, right? Just because in America, there's a big focus on, paying lower taxes. And there's always this fight about, hey, but living abroad in Germany or Austria or generally any European countries, you're paying so much taxes. Why would you want to do that? But again, people tend to be happy to pay higher taxes if that means that they have a better safety net. And I mean, it's obvious with the 88%, yes, we are okay to pay higher taxes if that means that our taxes is generally going to good use so that we feel more financially secure with healthcare, social security, and pension. Now, the question is, how many participants that are abroad are actually going to be voting in the swing states? Because I think if you're familiar with the US election, you're familiar with the fact that it usually comes down to these battlegrounds in certain key states. So, of course, we're not always sure what the swing states will be, but based on the 2020 swing states, it's about 13.8% of our participants are from those states. So, yes, that means that if you are abroad and you have the right to vote in the US election, you can make a difference because remember, in these swing states, the decision is made in the thousands, right? And so that is a big reason why we're seeing in this upcoming election a lot of focus on Americans abroad and getting Americans abroad to vote. I mean, technically, there's supposed to be 9 million of us out there. Of course, how many really are out there, how many are of voting age is a different question. But if 13.8% could potentially be from these swing states, it's so important to vote and make sure your voice is heard because you can change the result of this election. And remember, you may not be thinking, what does this election have to do with me, an American abroad, right? That's not living in the US. But the candidates that are chosen, the next president, the next, representatives of America can decide how taxation is done. And we obviously know that taxation is still impacting us, even though we don't live in the US. So, as we get into, do you exercise your right to vote? When you think about taxation or how it may impact you from being abroad, we ask the question, do you feel that this phrase is still valid for Americans living abroad today? No taxation without representation. And 64% said yes, it's still valid. And so, if we know we're being taxed while we're abroad, that means we must use our voice to also then be represented. And if we know anything from past elections, we have been overlooked. If we know anything from in general, right, in history, the way tax laws are made, the way any laws are made, we are overlooked as a community, as the Americans that are living abroad. However, if you don't vote, if you don't make your voice heard, then we may not be represented, and that can come through in the tax law. So for example, if you think when, certain tax laws came about such as those on foreign corporations, those they trickle down and they impact us. So if 64% of you believe that the phrase is valid, no taxation without representation, then again, another urge to make sure that you are using your voice to be represented. And so, as we get into being taxed, voting, is another complex question of have you considered renouncing your US citizenship due to the complexities of filing US taxes abroad? This one was a little bit more half half, leaning towards no. So 53% said no, they have never considered renouncing their US citizenship, while 47% said yes. And I think that just comes down to that this tax regime where we are taxing Americans abroad, it does leave a lot of Americans quite frustrated. So hopefully, as time goes on, that filing US taxes from abroad will become less complex. And of course, that's something we really care about here at MyExpatTaxes is how to make this US tax filing process a lot simpler, a lot more straightforward, and making sure that even if you're abroad, you're getting the refunds you're due. And if you're abroad at the same time, making sure you're not paying unnecessary taxes. Alrighty, now we get into the nitty gritty. Have you voted from abroad? 73% said yes. So that is great, right? It's great that people are exercising their right to vote. However, that does mean 27% have never voted from abroad. Again, your vote matters, right? Whether you're in a swing state or not, your vote matters because whoever becomes the next president, that does trickle down to tax changes, which then do trickle down to us. And if our voice is not heard, then when these tax laws are being made, they're not going to think about how that impacts the American abroad. When people are making laws about how to tax, you know, companies abroad, they're not going to be thinking about you as a self-employed person with a one, person company in Austria. So make sure that you vote so that they'll think about you and to make sure that the tax laws don't impact you in a negative way. Next question. Do you feel that your overseas vote makes an impact on the US election? 49% said yes, 51% said no. So very half-half and with, a little bit more thinking, no, their vote doesn't matter. But again, your vote does matter. Please exercise your right to vote. And you never know in those swing states, and even if you're not from one, because you never know which one will end up being a swing state, but in those swing states in the last election, it came down to the thousands. And if there's really 9 million of us out there, right, we can make quite a difference. The next question we have you ever had issues receiving your ballot on time when voting from abroad? And luckily, 78% said no, they didn't have issues. So that sounds great, right? That the majority of folks don't have issues, with the voting process from abroad. But of course, that also leaves room for improvement because 22% said yes, they did have issues receiving their ballot on time, which impacted obviously their ability to vote from abroad. So I hope that these issues will be ironed out as we come closer to this election. Remember, the earlier you register, the earlier you get your ballot, the more time you have for these issues and to resolve them. So, continuing onto the voting topic is do you feel that voting from abroad is worth the effort, right? Registering, receiving your ballot, sending in your ballot. 72% said yes, 28% said no. So, again, I guess that's the question is if you feel your voice isn't being heard, is it worth the effort? I hope that as the next election comes up, as we see that it's very pivotal for every vote to come in, that you feel that voting from abroad is worth the effort. And hopefully, as we highlighted, there are issues sometimes when you receive your ballot, that these issues continue to be ironed out. Remember, the more people vote from abroad, the more issues that they report, the more those back home in America realize that there are issues and will look to streamline the process. So if we don't give the feedback, if we don't go through the process, there's no room for improvement. So I encourage you to continue to vote, and, together we'll make sure that they know we are a force to reckon with. And so they'll make sure that the process is smoother for us. And, that leads into our last question here of, would you vote more frequently if the process was easier from abroad? And 77% said yes. So if there is anyone out there listening to this that has any influence on this voting process, that's the feedback. More people would vote from abroad if the process was easier, because it's not that straightforward. So we switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to look a little bit more about, you know, maybe why Americans are living abroad, because there are so many Americans abroad. And why did we all choose to leave the US? Do you find the cost of living better or worse than in the US? 58% said better. Of course, it depends on the country you're living in, but 58% said that they felt that the cost of living was better. 28% said the same, and 14% said worse. And so when you are moving abroad, right, that is something to consider: is how's life quality, how's the cost of living abroad? And, that will obviously impact if you're staying abroad for a longer time or not. Has your quality of life increased since moving abroad? 90% said yes. 90% of Americans living abroad have said that their quality of life has increased since moving abroad. We'll have to dig into that. Why is that so? So the next question we have is, do you feel safer living abroad? Again, 90% said yes, they feel safer living abroad. Do you feel more financially secure living abroad? And I touched on this in an earlier question, but this question is a lot more direct. Is 75% say yes, they feel more financially secure living abroad. And so, as we think about why us Americans are living abroad, there's numerous reasons. You could have relocated for a job. Maybe you found a partner that doesn't live in the US and you wanted to see, what does life look like outside. Maybe you started, a studied abroad program, or you started a different educational program, or you just said, hey, I want to see what else is waiting for me out there in the world. Whatever made you move, it seems like you're staying for some key reasons: quality of life, feeling safer, feeling more financially secure. So with that, we're closing out our US 2024 election survey and how Americans abroad feel about living abroad, how they feel about the upcoming election. Would they vote? Have they voted? Was it easy? Was it not? And, you know, has their quality of life increased from being abroad? And if so, why? And like I said at the beginning, I found these results very interesting, with the main message being that there should be no taxation without representation. We all know that if you're American abroad, if you're a US green card holder, and you meet the income filing requirements to file a tax return, then no matter where you live, you have to file your US taxes. If we can't change the taxation part, we can change the representation part. So make sure to register as early as possible, vote, and ensure that you are represented in the upcoming election and all future elections. Thank you very much. This survey was conducted by MyExpatTaxes, the leading software for Americans filing US taxes from abroad.